and welcome to Trusting After Trauma, Season 2, Rebuilding Resiliency After Narcissistic Abuse. I'm your host, Pi Venus Winslow. This informative interview series will provide valuable insights from experts who are dedicated to helping others heal from childhood trauma and narcissistic abuse so they can lead joyful, powerful, and fulfilling lives. Many of these professionals specialize in medicine, science, psychology, abuse recovery, personal development, energy work, and much more. I'm very excited to have Candace Plattor here with us today. Candace Plattor is an addictions therapist in private practice where she specializes in working with the family and other loved ones of people who are struggling with addiction in her unique and signature family addiction therapy program. As a former addict with over 33 years clean and sober, Candace learned that overcoming addiction is a family condition. Everybody in the family is affected by addiction, and everyone needs to heal. For more than 3 decades, she's been helping both addicts and their loved ones understand their dysfunctional behaviors and make healthier life choices. The results Candace achieves have been astounding. Addicts stop using and their families regain their lives from the ravages of addiction. Not only has her success led to a waiting list of clients, but she is a sought-after leader in the field of addictions. As the developer of the Plattor method of family addiction therapy, Candace now works with her team of top counselors, helping families and addicts break the cycle of addiction for good. Welcome, Candace. It's such a pleasure to have you here today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Pi. Hi, everyone. Yeah, I'm really glad to be here.
So tell us, what are the simple definitions of codependency and narcissism?
Yes, codependency and narcissism. What a great dance that is, right? So my definition of codependence is when you put other people's needs ahead of your own on a pretty consistent basis. Your needs go to the back burner. Narcissism is the exact opposite, where your needs have to get met as a narcissist, and the other person's needs go on the back burner.
It's a perfect match.
It's a match made in hell.
Yes. Yes.
So they come together and, they're always hoping that it'll be like this, but it's really kind of like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how do these personalities develop?
In my experience, personally and professionally as well, I find that they develop in childhood, that there are certain behavioral expectations that are put on children. And it's kind of an interesting thing because some of these expectations are the same, and some of the reasons that both of these personality disorders develop come from the same place, but they choose different ways of expressing themselves in this. So to use generalities that across the board are pretty true, and also because I need to use pronouns, most people who are codependent are women, not all, but most. So I'll say she. So the codependent is taught as a child that she's responsible for relationships. She's responsible for making them work. She's responsible if they don't work. She's at fault. There's shame to be felt if something goes wrong in a relationship. And there's usually a lot of blame that's bestowed on a child who's being almost groomed, usually unconsciously by the parents, but groomed to become codependent, to care more about them than she does about herself.
Mm-hmm.
With narcissism, what happens is the child is, it's a complicated thing because the child is being told, and I'll use him for that, that he's wonderful, he's so wonderful, but at the same time, he knows he's not so wonderful, and he's getting those messages too. He's wonderful, but there's a price to pay for that, and he better shape up and stay wonderful. So
Mhm.
there's a pressure that goes on for a child that is starting to be groomed to be narcissistic.
Mhm.
And and it just continues and follows people into adulthood. So the codependent person doesn't feel like she's good enough.
Mhm.
She needs other people to love her and like her and need her, especially need her.
Mhm.
The narcissist has this false kind of sense of arrogance, of entitlement, while deep down feeling the same thing that the codependent feels. I'm not really worthy,
Mm.
and I can't let anybody find out.
Mhm.
So I have to be arrogant and blustery and whatever, however that shows up in the relationships.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
interesting because it in a way, it sounds like they're opposites, but it
Mhm.
also sounds like they both suffer underneath from the same fears.
Yeah. And they're flip sides of the same coin, which is the way I like to look at it.
Mhm.
And I actually, I'm a recovering codependent. I hardly ever. I also use the word people pleasing to.
Mhm.
It's synonymous with codependency. Um, I don't do that very much anymore.
Mhm.
When I do it, when I slip back into it, I
Mhm.
feel it right away. And it's like this ew kind of feeling of, I don't like this. I want to go in a different direction. So I have a lot of compassion and empathy and understanding of codependency. I also have some empathy for narcissism, maybe not quite as much compassion because they're very difficult people to deal with.
Mhm.
But I understand that narcissists are very quite possibly the most insecure people walking the planet, but they
Yeah.
won't let anybody know that.
Right.
So they don't apologize, and they gaslight other people, and they do those behaviors to make sure that they stay in this place of, you're not going to know that that's happening to me.
Mhm.
I'll reject you before I let you know me.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, what happens when we're raised in a home with narcissistic or codependent parents?
Mm. Well, a lot happens and a lot doesn't happen. Um, I guess I could talk about my own story with
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
um, because I wasn't raised with codependency as much as I was raised with narcissism.
Mm.
My mother was a classic narcissist, and narcissists really need to be adored. And when a narcissist is not adored, when a narcissist is criticized or ignored or just not getting somebody's full attention,
Mhm.
in childhood, there are really steep price tags for that. There's hell to pay for that.
Mhm.
Um, so my mother was a very charismatic. That's another thing about narcissists. They have that charisma that draws people in.
Mhm.
My mother was very charismatic. She was brilliant intellectually. She didn't have a lot of emotional intelligence, but she she was top of her field.
Mhm.
Um, she was a woman ahead of her time in terms of professionally. She was, professor at a university, several universities, and she managed to make her way in the 50s and 60s when most women weren't doing that because she was able to have that charisma and that charm and that entitlement of the narcissist. So
Mhm.
people paid attention to her. Plus, she was brilliant. That helped a lot.
Mhm.
Most people who I met who knew her would tell me how lucky I was to have her as a mom.
Mhm.
And it took me a long time to understand that because that was not the experience I had. I
Mhm.
didn't feel particularly lucky.
Yeah.
Um, my father was not codependent. I wouldn't say he was classically codependent, but he had his own addictions. And one of the things he liked to do was have affairs with other women. So that just blew the family apart. And it was very difficult for myself, my brother, to navigate those waters. And so what happens in these kinds of situations is that the parents are really busy being self-absorbed with whatever addiction they might have. My mother had some addictions. She also worked, is a workaholic, was an addiction for her. My father had some addictions. They're really busy doing those and dealing with the chaos that addiction just brings into people's lives. They didn't have a lot of time or energy or understanding of us. And so that was a really difficult thing. I grew up feeling, one of the other things they did with us is they moved us around a lot for some reason. We weren't military, but we might as well have been, right? I was always the new kid at the school and new kid on the block. And I was very shy because I didn't believe in myself, didn't feel like I had a lot of self-worth. So this is how we grow up, is feeling like we're just not worthy. Not sure why people like us, not having that kind of understanding, not fitting in well with groups, not finding our own best friends as children,
Yeah, I do know, because my mother was a narcissist too.
Then you know
And
exactly.
my father was an alcoholic, so I can really resonate with your story. So how did growing up that way, like you mentioned, like how it affected you, how did you heal those difficult scars?
Well, I think I have probably a couple more scars to even talk about before I go into that, because what happens with the children of narcissists and codependents or other addicts is that they grow up with those scars that manifest in so many different ways. One of the ways it manifested in me, aside from the low self-esteem, I like to call it self-respect. Actually, I like that term better. I didn't have any of that. I didn't know who I was. I was doing okay. I was in university and I was doing okay, but I didn't know who I was. And it didn't matter what I did. It was never good enough. It was, I wasn't given emotionally what I needed to thrive, maybe to survive, but not to thrive. And finally, my body just kind of had enough of that. My body responded to that. And I feel like my body just kind of imploded on itself. And I became very, very ill and was diagnosed with Crohn's disease in 1973, which was a time when nobody really knew what Crohn's disease was. They knew colitis, but they didn't know Crohn's. Similar illness, but different. They gave me medication for colitis, not for Crohn's. That wasn't very helpful. That was hurtful. So I went through a lot of years being very sick, and I went through a lot of years with doctors giving me a lot of addictive medication because they didn't know what else to do with me. So they gave me Valium as much as I wanted. They gave me OxyContin, codeine, kind of you name it, I had it. And it made me feel better physically, and I liked the feeling of being high. I didn't have to worry about things, took the edge off. And so I just used these things. They were given to me by the doctor. I'm a good girl. I do what I'm told. So I took all these medications, and about 15 years into that, once again, my body and my psyche kind of really told me that something was very wrong with this picture. And I actually became suicidal, started thinking about how many pills I actually had to be able to kill myself. That was a very scary time. So I reached out for some help and started going to some 12-step programs. I didn't realize I was an addict. When I found out that I was an addict, that term actually helped me a lot. Some people don't like that label, but for me, it helped me a lot because I knew what was going on for me and I knew that I could do something about it. But that was a hard journey. That wasn't an easy, it takes a lot of development and a lot of dedication and determination to stay in recovery and to work on yourself, a lot of courage when
Yeah.
people do that, right? So one day at a time, 33 years clean and sober, and most days I like myself a lot. I still have days when I have growth periods that make my hair stand on end, but most of the time I really like who I am today. So when I look back at it, my journey is full of trauma. It's full of physical, emotional, psychic trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure that I would change anything.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe a few things,
Yeah.
but not very much, because I became who I am today, and I'm able to help other people, which is, to me, the whole name of the game, right?
Yeah. Oh,
So
that's such an inspiring story. And
mm,
so, when people grow up, with narcissistic or codependent parents, and then they go out into the world and they have these deep beliefs down inside that they're not worthy. And then they go out and they start looking for relationships with other human beings.
uh-huh.
So what are the payoffs and the price tags of being entangled with other people? And tell us, like, what's love got to do with it?
Yeah, actually, the answer to that one is not a whole lot. It's not really love. It just kind of feels like it should be love, but it really isn't.
Mhm,
Um, so what happens to codependence is, because again, narcissists need to be absolutely, totally, completely adored.
mhm,
That's the whole game for them, is to be adored and to have everybody be loyal to them. We're seeing that being played out in our world today.
mhm,
Um, Codependence, because they feel so empty inside, they don't know who they are, and they need somebody else to fill them up. They kind of need to adore. They need to make somebody the center of their lives so that they have a purpose, and they get up in the morning thinking about that person, and life becomes exciting again.
mhm.
um, and and that's really not love. That's codependency. So love doesn't have much to do with that. So these people, they find themselves in a room there, that old song, that old thing of, they saw each other across a crowded room,
Uh-huh.
and they recognized each other right away.
Mhm,
Oh, I got to get with her. Oh, I like him. Just even on an energy level, they know each other, and they come together and they do this thing that doesn't work very well.
yeah.
um, but they're totally attracted to each other because one needs to adore and the other one needs to be adored, and so that works really well for a minute.
Mhm,
It works really well for a little while,
mhm,
until the codependent starts seeing things in the narcissist that she doesn't really like all that much.
mhm,
And the narcissist feels controlled by the codependent, doesn't feel adored anymore.
mhm.
And so what the narcissist does is he turns it back around onto her, blaming her, like the codependent might say, "You're always late. Why are you always late? You said you'd be home at 6 o'clock, and you're not, 6:30, 7 o'clock. You could have called me. You're always late." And the narcissist turns around and says something like, "Well, if I liked you better, I'd probably be home on time."
Yeah.
And
If you weren't always yelling at me,
if
maybe I'd
you
want
weren't,
to come
yeah,
home.
if you weren't such a, so that feeds totally into the codependence feeling of not being good enough. And she, sometimes he, but she thinks, okay, I need to change this. I need to change. He must be right. And I need to change this. And this is why they don't leave.
Mhm,
This is why they stay. And then the relationship gets even more entangled and more twisted. And
mm,
sometimes there are children involved, and she can't leave, and it really becomes quite abusive, right? Or
yeah.
the narcissist will leave and then come back and then leave
Mhm,
and then come back and then leave, and
mhm,
just give her crumbs
Right.
Crumbs is I got a lot of crumbs in my life.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then what happens when like other substance or behavioral addiction is thrown into the mix?
Oh
I mean,
boy.
talk about adding fuel to the fire.
Yep. Yeah. And so people change right in front of your eyes when they're using these kinds of substances. So if the narcissist isn't feeling like you adore him anymore, he's going to go out and he's going to find other people to adore him. And sometimes that's going to mean partying. Sometimes that's going to mean cocaine. Sometimes that's going to mean alcohol. It's going to mean other women. It's going to
Mhm.
mean whatever needs to happen to be able to feel good about himself, because that's his shtick. He has to feel good about himself. He has to make you feel good about him.
Mhm.
The codependent, not too many codependent people develop huge addictions, but they develop little addictions. Like they'll have a glass of wine while they're cooking dinner, and then have another one, and then start having a third one, and then start having a fourth one. Or sugar is a big one
Mhm.
for codependence. So they'll start eating and start gaining weight and start not liking how they feel or look, and it just builds. So the narcissist is going to do things that make him feel better about himself. And the codependent is usually going to do things that make her feel worse about herself.
Hmm. Wow.
Right. And
Yeah.
so when the narcissist comes back, and before he leaves again, he comes back and he'll say something to the codependent like, I'm the only man that would ever put up with you.
Mhm.
I'm the only person. It's not just straight relationships this happens in. It happens in all kinds of relationships. So the narcissistic person, whatever gender, will say to the codependent, nobody else would put up with you.
Mhm.
Look at you. Look at how you gained weight. You're this, you're that. You're
Mhm.
lucky to have me.
Mhm. Mhm.
And it's just a perpetuating cycle until usually what happens is the codependent finally reaches out for some help,
Mhm.
goes to a support group or finds a therapist, somebody like myself to work with,
Mhm.
and and make some real progress in working with themselves. They want the narcissist to come with them. Not a great idea, because narcissists classically do not come to therapy unless they're going to help the other person who's so sick.
Right.
They're fine. It's
Yeah.
the other person, right? And
Yes.
so that's,
They're outraged if you even suggest it.
oh yeah, they don't come back if you challenge the narcissist, not usually anyway. And if they do come back, they're obnoxious and they challenge the therapist, and it becomes that game.
Mhm. Mhm.
And usually the codependent is just sitting there.
Mhm.
Wait a minute, this was my session.
Mhm.
But she never says that
Right. Right.
until
So
she does.
so
Until she
can
does. Yeah.
yeah, well that I was just going to ask you,
Yeah.
can codependents and narcissists really recover and live their best lives?
I like to think so. I am living proof that codependents can do that. I'm
Mhm.
absolutely living proof that yes. In fact, this is my favorite mug. And it says, live a life you love.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Um, I have not always lived a life I loved, but it is very possible. From a narcissist, from the perspective of the narcissist, it's a very difficult personality disorder to deal with,
Mhm.
because the one thing that needs to happen for them to see some of their own foibles
Mhm.
is exactly what they refuse to do, because they're so scared to do that.
Mhm.
Um, so I like to think that anybody can change if they're willing to do that.
Mhm.
I do think that. I do think that anybody can change if they're willing to put in the work to do it.
Mhm.
Most narcissists that I've been in contact with over my lifetime have not been.
Yeah. Yeah.
But codependent people can learn to understand themselves at a much deeper level. They start to understand why they're shooting themselves in the foot and attracting these kinds of relationships and staying in these kinds of relationships, so that they can start building relationships with different people who aren't narcissistic, who
Hmm.
aren't so self-absorbed.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, yes, then, whether they choose to be in a relationship or they choose to be on their own, yes, they can live such a better life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the work you're doing is it's making a big impact on the world. So Candace, what would you say is the most important thing for someone who grew up with narcissistic parents to remember?
Mhm. There is something, and it's really so important. In order to heal from this, like really truly heal, we need to understand that what happened to us in childhood, how they treated us, was not about us. It was about them. It wasn't because we weren't smart enough or good enough or pretty enough or any of those things. It had nothing to do with us. In fact, when people are self absorbed, the way narcissists and codependent people are, anybody with any kind of addictive behavior, it's really always about them. It's never about us. So if you've been holding on to any shame about, I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy, my hope for you is that you're going to get yourself some help to work through that, because this is definitely healable.
You've just finished writing a book, haven't you?
Yeah, it's my third book. Yeah. Um, I have a copy of them here. My first book is Loving an Addict, Loving Yourself. It's
Hmm.
the top 10 survival tips for loving someone with an addiction.
Hmm.
And it's won some awards, which I was so surprised about, because as an addict, I never thought that I would ever do anything that was going to help the world. Never even occurred to me. But yeah. And so the second book is a workbook that goes with the first book. So it's Loving an Addict, Loving Yourself, the workbook. And it's got, questions, and, you can write in it. And so the third book that's just about to come out, um, I've been doing something called Self Respect Sundays, and they're these beautiful images with quotes from my first book on them.
Hmm.
And we send them out to my newsletter every Sunday, to my newsletter list. And um, people just love them, and they write to me, like what you were telling me before our interview, people write to you and tell you how much they enjoy your summit.
Hmm.
People write to me and tell me about that. They say, thank you so much. This really made sense. It really helped me this week.
Hmm.
So what I did was I took a bunch of different images, new different images, and and put my quotes on them. So they're different, completely different um, from what you've received if you're on my newsletter list. These are different.
Hmm.
And then journaling pages with butterflies,
That's so
because that's kind of
beautiful.
my, yeah. I love the cover too. I love it.
Yes, a
Yeah.
weekly journal. Journaling is so helpful.
Yeah. Journaling is really helpful. It allows you to just kind of open your head and open your heart and just let it come out.
Hmm.
And because we're most of the time not going to be showing our journals to anybody else, we
Hmm.
get to be as open, as real and genuine as we can be. And that's the work.
Yeah,
That's the work. Yeah.
yeah. It's a very sacred practice, and
Yeah.
yeah.
So this third book is just about out, and it should be out probably next week and available to people, maybe for Christmas for people. It's
Woo!
it's especially if you love an addict, right? That's what the second line is.
Yeah.
So my quotes are about, are you the loved one of somebody struggling with addiction? How are you doing? What do you need to be looking at in yourself? How do you need to change something to live your own best life? So those are what the quotes are about.
Amazing, amazing.
Thanks.
And you've also got a special gift just for our viewers. Can you
Mm-hmm.
tell us about
Yes. Yes. So if you go onto my website, you can sign up for my newsletter and get a free chapter of my book.
that? Oh,
Yeah.
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 Wonderful.
And I think maybe the first couple of people who do that, they can email me and they can say, I'm the first one who did this, or the second one who did this, and I'll send them for free the PDF version of Loving an Addict, Loving Yourself.
Oh, that is so generous of you. Thank
Yeah.
you, Candace. That's amazing.
And we also do free 30-minute telephone consultations with people. All they have to do is fill out our questionnaire, which isn't too long or entailed. It's pretty easy to fill out. Once we get that, we'll be in touch with you to set up a 30-minute telephone consultation so we can find out what's going on with you and how we might be able to help you. Yeah.
Amazing, amazing, Candace. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise, your wisdom, your story, and your free gift with us.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And thank you, everyone, for joining us for Trusting After Trauma Season 2, Rebuilding Resiliency After Narcissistic Abuse. Remember to keep checking your email so that you don't miss out on any of the amazing interviews in this series. We'll continue to explore with our experts on how we can rebuild resiliency after narcissistic abuse and heal our body, mind, and spirit to live joyful, authentic lives. We'll see you soon. Bye.
Bye.